KONRAD and the Second Vampire War from 2058 to 2121 IC. The war had ended, and Vlad's dream of an undead empire was dead alongside him, while the horrors perpetrated by his unholy campaign would still stalk mankind's worst nightmares for centuries to come. The vampire threat hadn't been routed. The vampires had indeed fled into the woods and were returning to their power base within Sylvania, but still, 2 of Vlad's lieutenants were alive, and enough direct descendants to assure the continuation of his line. Jarek Kruger, a warrior with experience commanding, managed to shepherd the surviving vampires back to Sylvania. He would, however, never try to obtain the position of Count. Another vampire by the name of Skelan had been captured by the Altdorfers and was imprisoned in a crypt beneath the Cathedral of Altdorf, where they kept him as a prisoner for many years afterwards. Felix Munn, wanting to claim his reward, discovered that with no physical proof of the deal he had with the Grand Theogenist, no one would believe he had committed the theft on behalf of the Holy Man. Wronged and angered, Felix stole one of Vlad's books of Nagash, but while fleeing from the Sigmarites, he became aware that someone was following him from the shadows. When Felix was finally cornered by the stranger in a back alley, he tried to buy him off with the dead Count's signet ring. The stranger, who was in fact Manfred von CARSTEIN, severed the 2 hands of the thief, took the ring and the book, and left Felix for dead. Thus, Vlad's artifacts passed on to a vampire and necromancer of almost equal power. Isabella von CARSTEIN would be taken captive the very next night when they caught her trying to find her husband's body, which had been buried beneath the Theogenist's grave. She was completely hysterical and had lost all touch with reality. She would eventually commit suicide when the Lector of Sigma, in an attempt at pity, told her Vlad was really dead and would not come back. Following Vlad's death, only 5 vampires claimed to be the heir to his legacy. These vampires were Fritz, Hans, Peter, KONRAD, and Manfred von CARSTEIN. For more than 40 years afterwards, the vampires of the von CARSTEIN line fought a vicious power struggle against each other, giving the Empire vital time to recover from the desolation brought about by Vlad's invasion. In time, Fritz von CARSTEIN was killed on the field of battle when he foolishly attempted to besiege the massive fortress city of Middenheim. Hans von CARSTEIN perished when KONRAD instigated a quarrel between them over who was the toughest amongst them. Peter was slain in his coffin by a vengeful witch hunter by the name of Helmut von Hahn, a distant descendant of an ancient and powerful necromancer from the time of the Skaven Wars. It is said that Manfred von CARSTEIN had also aided in his death. After Peter's death, Manfred von CARSTEIN disappeared from Sylvania, leaving KONRAD as the new and undisputed ruler of all of Sylvania. In time, KONRAD began the Second Vampire War, much to the Empire's dismay. Whilst Vlad von Carstein was patient, Konrad von Carstein was simply a mad butcher, evil, merciless, and insanely violent. Lacking the necromantic skills of his predecessor, Konrad was forced to enslave any magicians he could capture and force them to do his bidding as powerful necromancers. Once more, the vampire counts of Sylvania rampaged across the lands of the Empire. Indeed, Konrad was beyond bloodthirsty, even amongst his own kin. Vlad offered his opponents a choice between servitude or death. Konrad offered them a choice between dying quickly or dying slowly. The former Count's ambition was to rule as the Vampire Emperor of the Empire. Konrad's single motivation was to simply indulge himself in endless slaughter. His war-mongering nature took his army to the far south of the Empire, where he came into contact with the Blood Knights of Blood Keep, the bearers of the Blood Dragon bloodline. With these knights folded into his ranks, Konrad was able to destroy all those who would dare to oppose him, even given Konrad's complete lack of strategic planning, hysteria, and grave tactical errors. At the Battle of Kleiberstorf, however, Konrad faced a powerful Avalander army that contained a massive wagon train of long-range artillery. When battle commenced, the Avalander artillery was merciless towards the slow-moving Sylvanian army. In desperation, Konrad threatened, bribed, and pleaded with his necromancers to keep his army moving forward. He offered power and riches to his captive wizards, and they acceded, combining their powers to unleash a scourging wind on the Avaland army. Dark magic swept across the Imperial ranks, and in a short time, the Imperial soldiers began to feel their souls being clawed by ethereal hands. Panic began to spread as the unnatural gale stripped the life of the Imperial soldiers one by one. In a rare moment of tactical genius, Konrad saw that the moment was ripe for a counterattack and sent his elite squadron of Blood Knights and Drakenhove Templars into the fray. Faced with incomprehensible terrors and armored vampires, the Avaland army broke and fled. Konrad, like the bloodthirsty creature he was, hounded the Imperial soldiers for 5 days and 5 nights, ensuring that all those that participated in the battle were hunted down and killed to the very last man. In his overzealous pride and need to draw more blood, the Vampire Count had instigated a bloody war with the dwarves, against the cautious advice of his few remaining advisors, attacking isolated villages and surface settlements within the domains of Zufbar. The dwarf king of Zufbar himself finally had enough, and mustered a grand army to punish the vampire for his wrongdoings. Seeing a new challenge, the vampire met the dwarf army at the town of Nachthafen. In the battle, the dwarven runesmiths countered the necromantic spells of Konrad's enslaved necromancers with ease. Robbed of their sustaining power, the skeletal warriors and zombies of Konrad's army lay where they fell, blasted apart by a massive barrage of cannons and mortar artillery. KONRAD remained confident despite the setbacks and launched an all-out assault on the dwarves' right flank. Leading the assault himself, the vampire drove directly towards the cadre of runesmiths, whilst his blood knight smashed into the disciplined ranks of dwarf warriors. KONRAD slew the runesmiths personally, drinking their spilled blood and giving his captive necromancers the time they needed to resurrect the fallen. It was a hopeless battle, but the dwarves still fought stubbornly until the very end. Their own king had challenged the Blood Count to personal combat, but instead of accepting, KONRAD dispatched Valach Harkon, the Grand Master of the Blood Knights, to fight as his champion. Though the duel was bitter close, the Grand Master finally killed the Dwarf King with a mighty blow and gorged himself on royal blood. Within the next hour, the last of the dwarves were all dead. KONRAD was so unwavering and vicious in his undead assault that, confronted with a common enemy, the three claimants to the Imperial throne had put aside their differences and combined their mighty armies into one titanic force with which to oppose him. At the Battle of the Four Armies, the three Imperial Grand Armies stood united against the undead army of KONRAD just outside the fortress city of Middenheim. This battle became infamously known for the Great Betrayal by two of the Imperial leaders. Emperor Ludwig and Empress Attila IV attempted to assassinate each other during the battle, a disgusting gesture that forced the other Imperial counts to select another candidate to lead this new coalition. A conclave of the Elector Counts assembled themselves within Averheim, where they decided that Helmut of Marienburg would be a prime candidate to be the new emperor. Even as support for him grew within the council hall, Helmut began to act erratically, struck dumb and vacant at a critical time. Eventually, Helmut's skin began to peel off, and his eyes suddenly popped out of his own skull. Even Helmut's son, Helmar, refused his father's claim to the throne once it was discovered that his father was killed and turned into a zombie under KONRAD's control. With his ploy failing, KONRAD went into a rage and slaughtered his way from Averheim into the Howling Hills, putting to the torch every town and village that stood in his way. Finally, having enough of KONRAD's sadistic invasion, all of the remaining Elector Counts and Dwarf Lords joined forces once more upon the Battle of Grimmur during the spring of 2121 IC. Arrogantly, KONRAD once again made a headlong charge against the fully arrayed armies of all the Elector Counts and Dwarf warriors under their hero, Grufbad. Although his elite corps of warriors had managed to endure the punishment, a strange event began to occur. In that instant, the regiments of the undead began to falter, with the magic that bound them together seeping away. The enslaved necromancers finally had enough of KONRAD's sadistic rule and fled the battlefield without a second glance. Seeing the battle was lost, the terrified Blood Knights retreated as well, hoping to escape the vengeful dwarves and Imperials. In desperation, The magically inept KONRAD tried to hold the undead army together by himself. But the effort proved too much to bear, and KONRAD's mind finally snapped. In a mad fit, KONRAD wandered away from the battle while his undead army began to disintegrate, shouting maniacally as his mind lay shattered. KONRAD wandered the forest for some time until he was ambushed by Grufbad, who captured the vampire and held him down as the newly elevated Elector Count Helmar impaled his father's killer with his own runefang. With KONRAD's death, the Second Vampire War was finally over, and in time, the Elector Counts began to squabble amongst themselves once more.